Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Neil Foley, and I'm the Applications Engineer here at RISE. Today I'm going to be talking about package design with full color 3D printing. So first of all, I'll talk a bit about what I mean by packaging design. So essentially this would be cases where a company is developing a new product with images and colors on the surface of the box or the bottle or whatever that product comes in, and as a way of testing out different images or colors or different overall designs, there are a few different ways to go about that. One of those is just to view the images in software. Another is to create 3D full color models. And finally, you can actually print those models using full color 3D printing. So the way that would work would be to first 3D print the packaging design prototype with a 3D printer capable of doing full color. And what that would allow you to do is verify the design visually and in full 3D. So this is helpful for being able to see the part in your hand and being able to move it around, manipulate in the 3D world as opposed to through a screen, which can be challenging for many people to get a full grasp of how that part would look in reality. Another thing this is helpful with is testing multiple iterations of geometry and images, and again being able to hold them, test them for fit and feel, and do so side by side. And finally, you are able to share those results physically to support communication and feedback among colleagues or departments or anyone who would be involved in the design of those package prototypes. So now I want to talk about a bit of what RISE is able to do that makes us especially well positioned to work with full color packaging prototypes. So RISE has a unique patented 3D printing process that we call augmented polymer deposition, where what we do is we combine a thermoplastic extruder with a set of print heads like the type you would see in a 2D printer. We combine these into a hybrid system that allows us to, between layers of extruded plastic, jet different function lengths. So typically the way this process would work is we would begin by extruding thermoplastic on the bottom layers to create supports. Above those, we would jet release ink, and then we would continue extruding more thermoplastic, and within those layers of thermoplastic, we would be able to jet other functional inks, such as different colors. So because of this technology, we're able to achieve some quite impressive designs in terms of color, quality, resolution, and geometric quality as well. So some of the things that you're able to apply this to with regard to packaging prototypes is, rather than, for example, printing out a sheet of paper and wrapping it over a fairly simple cylindrical shape like you may have to do with other methods, this would allow you to easily print very complex surfaces using the geometric capabilities of 3D printing, and you would also be able to print accurate designs onto them using the layer by layer voxel control of the printhead. So some of the benefits of this include the fact that by printing parts with 3D printing, you're going to get very durable parts, and this is beneficial for haptic testing, which would be passing it around, testing the way it feels and fits in different applications. And RISE technology has some particular benefits when it comes to durability and strength. Some of the other useful things are that because of the development of this technology and some of the breakthroughs we've been able to make, we're able to get very consistent and uniform color across all surfaces. So whether you're printing color and texture on the top or the sides or even the bottom, you're able to get very close to the same color quality and brightness over the entire part. And finally, we're able to print with a very vivid colors that are mapped fairly well to the exact colors coming out of your computer, and that allows you to produce parts that are quite faithful to the design that they're emulating, and that ensures that when you produce a colored part, it's not going to be so far off of the color scheme that you begin with that it won't be useful for ensuring that your color design is what you're looking for. And one more thing I wanted to mention is that the RISE process has specifically designed our end-to-end use of the printer so that it would be very easy to learn and use. And this means that you don't need to be an expert in 3D printing, and it doesn't take a lot of training to get used to using the RISE 1 or XRISE. And that means someone who has previously not had much work with 3D printing or no work at all with 3D printing could quickly jump in and begin using it for prototyping package designs. So here are the few main categories that packaging design prototypes are useful for. This includes food and drink packaging, cosmetic tubes and bottles, various types of boxes used for consumer products. And in addition to the packaging, it's also useful for prototyping the designs of the consumer products themselves. So this would include something like the shoe shown here. And finally, it can be useful for producing 3D printed marketing materials that can have complex geometry and color. For example, small models of the type of product that is being sold by that company. So now we'll talk a bit more technically about what goes into producing the models and the printed parts in packaging design prototyping. So to begin with, you're going to need to have some basic materials in order to create your files to be printed. So you're going to need a model. This can be the model of the can or bottle or box that you are going to be producing, and you'll also need the images that you want to apply to it. This can be full images, or it can just be colors, which can be applied surface by surface. So with the RISE One Touch software specifically, we accept a variety of different file types. Many of those are capable of importing color information. So we accept STL files, which are without color, but we also accept OBJs, OBJs, which will come with MTLs, also PLYs, WRLs, 3MFs, and our native RISE format as well. So if you're able to, with whatever program you're using, get it into one of those common file types, then you'll have no problem importing it into our software. So there are a lot of different ways of combining the models that you create with the images that you want to apply to them. Many modeling softwares make that quite easy, particularly if they're software designed for modeling 3D models to be used in videos or computer-generated images. So if you're using one of those modeling softwares, you probably will have no trouble. Another way of doing it is using CAD software. This is what I would be more familiar with, working primarily with engineering type parts. And there are different ways of doing this in many different CAD softwares. It's generally more difficult to add textures in CAD software than in modeling software because they're not necessarily designed for that purpose. But there often are ways of doing it, and I'm going to take a moment now to show what goes into that. So Okay, let's start with, this is SolidWorks, a CAD software that I use for most of the modeling that I do, at least for creating new parts. So this is a small tag. You could think of it as a marketing material, and it has the Rise logo on it, and it has a texture on the back with a few different colors on it. So each of these different colors, as well as portions of this side, will have their own appearance color over here. So the way this would work is that I would right click here and click Add Appearance. Now for SolidWorks, it defaults to selecting the whole part, so I would remove that, and then I could choose faces. So now in this form, I'm able to select the different faces that I want to add a new appearance to. So I could do the top face or any of these faces here. I'm just going to do it on this main face right there. And now what I can do is browse for an image. And let's see here. And I'm just going to select this one. So this is a nice rainbow texture. Oops. And this rainbow texture is being repeated across the part. So there's a bunch of different controls down here that you could use to adjust it if it doesn't come out exactly the way you want on the first try. So for example, if I go to the mapping tab, I could say fit width to selection, and now it's not repeating itself. We just have it one time, and then I could also, if I want to, mirror it horizontally, and that switches which side the rainbow is coming from. So if I were to apply this, it won't let me apply it until I save the texture type. But so most of these appearances are just color appearances. One of them, this rainbow, is created using the method I just showed, where it has its own image file attached to it, and that image is right here. So again, I could edit this and move it around if I want to switch which side each of the colors is on. So now the important thing, once you have the model in the form that you want it, would be to make sure that you save it in a format that's going to maintain the color. So if I go up here to save as, there are 3 file types that SolidWorks can save into that Rise One Touch software is capable of opening, and those are these 3 right here. There's WRL, STL, and 3MF. So as I mentioned, STL does not contain color information. VRML, WRL, or 3MF do contain color information. Now, with the case of SolidWorks specifically, you can save color into WRLs, but you can't save textures. So if you've applied textures the way that I did with the rainbow there, then it won't show up if you save as WRL. If I use a 3MF, then it will save both. It'll save both the color and the texture. So this would be the choice that I would use for a part like this. One more thing to note is, in addition to adding colors and texture maps to parts in SolidWorks, you're also able to add decals, and decals will not show up in WRL or 3MF file types. I've not yet found a way myself to save decals from SolidWorks into a file type that can be opened by Rise software, so I would stick to using image textures rather than decals. So one more thing I should mention is that if you are choosing to save into 3MF in order to maintain your image textures, you'll want to go into Options and make sure that down here this box includes appearances is checked off, and that'll make sure it keeps all of the colors that you want. The next thing I'm going to look at is a different modeling software, and this is called Magix Materialize, or Materialize Magix. And this software is very useful for applying textures. It's a bit easier to apply textures here than in SolidWorks. This is more of an artistic kind of software, or at least software that is especially good at applying colors and images easily. So here is a cosmetic tube, and I'd like to apply some images to the front and back of it. So I'll just take you through a little bit of what's involved in that. So the first thing I'm going to do is select this front face. And these are all of the triangles that we want to affect. It goes around to the side but doesn't cross to the back. And then I'm going to go to the texture tab and select new texture, and we're going to put this one on. There we go. So now it should bring up a box here. There it is. So this box gives a set of options. I'm going to take off the tiling and scale it a bit. It looks a little short there, so I'll make it about 200%, and then let's spin it around so that we get the front there. Looks about right. Maybe center it a little, and then it's good. So now our texture is applied to the front, and if I like to, I can do the same thing onto the back surface, and then I'll have a fully textured package prototype here that I could bring into Rise software and try printing it out. So now, if we head back to the presentation, so that covers markups in CAD or modeling software. One of the major benefits of doing it in the CAD software is that even though it's sometimes more difficult to apply color and texture, especially in CAD software, the benefit is that if you are saving from your CAD software into a different format and then importing that format into Rise software, having the color information in the starting file, in the file that you're manipulating in CAD, means that when you produce new iterations, you don't have to reapply any textures. All of them will already be attached to it. So in some cases, either you don't want to use that method or you aren't able to get the right capabilities to apply texture in your CAD software, and so you'll either use another modeling software or you can apply your images and color in Rise. So I'm going to show quickly how you would go about that in Rise software. So here we have another kind of package. This is, of course, a Dr. Pepper can. So Rise, with our most recent update of the software, changed some of the way that you would apply images and text to parts. So we now have this button here, Markup, which brings us into markup mode. And so using this mode now enables you to not only apply markups, but edit prior markups and even delete them if you choose to. So what I'm going to do on this part is just demonstrate some of the capabilities of applying textures. So I'm going to take us back to the old classic view with this one. So what I want to do is apply this texture so that not only will it show the front of the part, but it'll actually wrap all the way around to the back. So we have some options over here on the left. There's a straight projection and wraparound. So if I select wraparound, each of these has a slightly different effect. You can either wrap it 180 or 360 degrees, or you can tell it keep width, which will essentially keep the aspect ratio while wrapping it cylindrically. So I'm going to choose 360 degrees, and all of that is correct. So now I can hit apply, and it wraps it around. So this is similar to the process that you could use with the Bioten cosmetic tube that I just showed you in Magix. The processes are, of course, a little bit different. There's no selection of different portions of it, but if I only wanted it to apply this texture to the front surface in this Rise software, then I would just choose not to wrap it around, or maybe choose only 180 degrees. So that is all for applying images. The other thing you can do in Rise software is quite easily add text. So if, for example, I wanted to identify this part according to the iteration, the version of its design, then I could say, maybe abbreviate it to version 1 and also give a date that I created this. So what's today, the 20th? I'll center these. Now I can apply this text right on. Whoop. Made a mistake there. All right, so what I need to do is go back up here and make sure that rather than wrapping it around, I still go back to projecting straight. And there we go. All right, so now that'll show up in the final part, and no matter what happens to this part, no matter how many other versions you produce, you'll always know where this one came from. Now back in standard mode, I'm ready to slice this part and get it ready for printing. Cool. All right. So now I just wanted to mention a few best practices involved in both creating your models in software and in producing, packaging prototypes in general. So one of those that I alluded to a little bit is determining when to use Rise OneTouch or other modeling software, depending on the types of things you're trying to do. So with regard to image texturing versus coloring, if you are applying images that are fairly self-contained, not tiling, but just showing, for example, on this part, you have an image with some text and you place it onto the front of the part, maybe wrapped around. That's a perfectly fine thing to apply using Rise OneTouch. Something that's sometimes a bit more difficult is coloring parts in OneTouch, because if you're coloring, then you would probably be using a small image file that's colored with well, a certain color, and in order to apply it to the part, you'd probably need to apply several copies of it to different places. So for example, on the part that you see here, there's a cap at the top with an overhang, and in order to apply color into that, you may need to apply a few separate textures into the different directions in the part, whereas that could be a lot easier with other modeling software or even CAD software if you're able to select those faces and apply the texture all at once. So that's one thing, is that if you're coloring a complex geometry, it's usually easier to do that earlier in the process than waiting until you get into OneTouch. However, images and text especially is easy enough to apply. Another thing is projection versus UV mapping. So near the bottom, I mentioned straight versus cylindrical projection. So this is just the difference between what you saw with the text that I was applying, where I wanted it to project directly onto the part and appear the same way that it did as I applied it, versus cylindrical projection, which will wrap around the part and will not necessarily look exactly the way it does as you're applying it. So both Rise software and Magix have straight and cylindrical projection. SolidWorks has versions of both of those, so any of those is fine as long as you are able to get the orientation of the axis around which you're cylindrically wrapping worked out, and there's a few other things essentially that you'll just have to play with. Now the alternative to that is UV mapping, which is much more powerful, but in some cases more difficult to get a handle on. So there are some modeling softwares most often used for producing models for video and CG, as I mentioned, and those will typically be able to use UV mapping, where you select each triangle of the part and place exactly where you want the texture to align with it. So that can be a lot more work, but allow you to get exactly what you're looking for. So the last thing I wanted to mention is some of the different degrees of surface color fidelity that different companies may be looking for and what RISE is capable of achieving. So with regard to distinguishable coloration, this would be simple cases where maybe you're producing an early prototype of a design where you just want to get the layout right and maybe have it separated into a simple color scheme, but perhaps not the exact final result. This is something that's totally achievable in RISE. It of course has a pretty wide gamut of colors that it can produce, and so just being able to produce distinguishable colors with clear lines between them is something that we're perfectly capable of. The next degree would be being able to accurately produce the hue, saturation, and other variables that you're sending into the part from your modeling software. And this is something that RISE is capable of, certainly to a degree. We're able to get pretty precise color mapping. One of the major efforts in developing the XRISE for release was to nail down a really good color mapping to ensure that we are producing parts that are faithful to their appearance in the software that produced them. However, there are in some cases requirements of very precise color production with tools that maybe are analyzing the exact spectrum being produced by the color of a part and things like that. And that is something that currently is a bit beyond the capability of our color. It is something that possibly in the future we could get more involved with to really get accurate down to that level. Finally, the last level is quite specific to a small number of companies who care about reflectivity and viewing angle and things like that, that really are going to be the result of very minute differences among the way that parts are produced. And this is going to be a challenge for RISE. There are perhaps some cases where we would be able to produce what they're looking for in terms of reflectivity and so on, but it's certainly something that should not be necessary except in either very late prototypes or now getting into the end-use part stage. So those are some of the different degrees of color fidelity that companies may be looking for and what RISE is able to achieve among those. So that is all that I have for you today. Thank you all once again for joining us for today's webinar. I'm going to stick around for a few minutes now in case anyone has questions. If you do have questions, you can type them into the chat box in your GoToMeeting window. It should be at the bottom, and I'll stick around and answer any of those as they come. If you have off-topic questions or just want to reach out, you can always reach me at applications@rise3d.com. Other than that, if you don't have any questions, thank you once again for joining us and have a nice day.